Okay, I want to talk to you today about putting the demand side solutions actually in the bigger context of mitigation scenarios and the transformation that we need towards a net zero society. And I want to do so by starting to, sorry, maybe I got to start over. I missed that screen, but it's probably still sharing, right?
It's still sharing. You can just start over and I cut the part at the beginning.
Yeah, okay, I will do that. I just realized it's gone.
Okay.
Just before I talk for another 10 minutes, only to find out.
Oops.
Yeah.
But I have time all day, Bas. I think you have more meetings than I do, so
I have half an hour left, and then the day
we
rolls
can we can do it. We can
rolls
do
on.
it. I'm convinced.
Okay, good.
Okay, please.
So I want to talk to you today about putting this demand side transformation in the context of the longer term climate targets that we have and the transformation that we need in our society towards net zero. And the basic paradigm here is that the conventional view on reaching climate targets basically is that we need to reach these targets by the end of the century, and that we have all this inertia in policy development and social and technological change that basically pushes us into an overshoot of the climate target on the short term. But on the long term, we will compensate for that by having net negative emissions and removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. But in the language of the Paris Agreement, basically, there is the request or the target not to overshoot and to go for a rapid transformation on the short term to create this new balance within a few decades, basically, right? And this such a rapid transformation would be possible and driven by changes in demand, especially, but also by more granular and smaller scale distributed end use supply technologies. And especially demand has a very large potential to drive this change on the supply side and to bring emissions down. If we look here, we see across several sectors here, we see how much of the energy that is originally being harvested as primary energy, how much of that energy actually makes it all the way through conversions to secondary energy, to useful energy that is actually providing the primary service, and then the actual service that is being consumed. If we zoom in a bit here on the transport sector, we see this especially, and there's a very large gap here from secondary energy to useful energy. This is the step where the internal combustion engine is moving the car. And that's a very inefficient piece of equipment, basically. And a lot of the energy that is part of the fuel basically leaves through the exhaust of the car. And then if you only are driving the car by yourself and not using it with 4 or 8 people, as could also be possible, even the services provided with that fuel are not as efficient as could be. And so this shows that if we find new ways to provide these services at the end of this chain and to be more efficient in our end users to create the useful energy services, that we actually might have a very strong lever on reducing the demand for energy upstream. And with that, also for reducing the demand for fossil fuels and for reducing the demand for upscaling of renewables. So that is what has been explored in the low energy demand scenario, the so-called LED scenario. And here it is depicted in the middle of these 5 scenarios that you see here as different bars, as one of the indicative mitigation pathways of the latest IPCC 6th assessment report. And it shows that this low energy demand scenario really has a very small reduced dependence on carbon dioxide removal. So the sinks, the part below zero of this line, is very small compared to other scenarios. And also the amount of remaining emissions basically coming from other sectors is very low. And with that, you also reduce the trade-offs basically between mitigation and other sustainable development goals, such as biodiversity or food security. And we also increase basically flexibility for choices and being more critical on supply side options. And it's not like in some of the other scenarios where we have high demand that you need all of the supply side options that we can think of. So this scenario, in terms of its narrative, basically builds on bringing together several trends that we already see in society. So one of those is digitalization. Another one, strong innovation and decent living standards as providing basic services basically to everyone living on this planet, to have inclusive development. And each of these trends, basically by strongly building on the interconnections that they have and taking how digitalization can help, for example, development, how digitalization can help innovation, and the other way around, by harvesting those trends, we can build this low energy demand future. Some of these trends, for example, they include changes in consumer preferences, changes in diets, changes in materialism, people consuming the service rather than owning the equipment, new business models that provide the service rather than sell the equipment, and also the smaller scale technologies that allow for faster learning to reduce the cost, but also allow for learning in how these technologies are operated. And so we have many more chances to learn if we have smaller scale technologies. For example, here, a change in the diets, here the total consumption of meat substitutes, how that has grown rapidly over the past decade and is expected to keep on growing over the next few years. How shared equipment like bikes and shared cars, but also ride sharing and mobility as a service would actually help you to get from A to B without owning a car or owning a lot of transport equipment. And that's also reflected basically in more recent years by the reduction that we see in people owning driver's licenses. And so also here, there is a generational change going on that simply because there is better public transport, better ride sharing, people don't need driver's licenses. An extreme example of this is calculated by the International Transport Forum, part of the OECD. They looked at multiple cities, and here's an example of Dublin, where they analyzed that all of the current mobility demands basically within the city could be delivered with just 2% of the current number of vehicles in the city, basically by a combination of shared mobility and largely existing rail and light rail transit systems. So this would lead, on the one hand, to a little reduction in person kilometers, simply because for being more efficient on routes, but also lead to a reduction in emissions and congestion, right? And so would have multiple co-benefits also for space in the city and a complete rethink of the city when it doesn't need as much parking space as it needs now. Digitalization, as mentioned, is really one of those forces that can really help all of these developments. On the one hand, by making usership more possible, because you want to rely on reliable services, and the digitalization is there really important to provide these services, also to organize the sharing economy in what you can share with colleagues, with neighbors, with people in the same area as where you live, and it can help to make all of the equipment basically smarter, to be able to, so that the tools and the equipment talks to each other and is not dependent on a human person basically interfering and making the choices. But digitalization itself can also become a driver of efficiency. So on the one hand, many of these digital devices are becoming much more efficient over time, but also the example of the smartphone as a key digitalization device shows how one device can basically replace many other devices that we used to have in our homes. If you look at this figure here on the right, you see how, of course, because you own a smartphone nowadays, you no longer need a camera, an alarm, a video camera, a radio, a separate phone, all these things. And these things did embody about 26 kilograms of materials and used a lot of energy, basically, if not only in use, then also in being standby. And if only in standby, basically, we're using, about 12 times as much energy as your phone is using in full use. That development really helps to make such a low energy demand future come true. And this is the bigger context I wanted to share with you. And now my colleagues will go into much in depth in specific aspects of low energy demand futures. Thank you.